You got 30 days to move your livestock, or we'll have you removed by force. I stood on the porch of my grandfather's ranch, land that's been ours since 1952, staring down a woman who'd been in town less than half a year, yet thought she could kick me off my own property. Karen Whitfield gripped her clipboard like it was sacred scripture. Her hair, frozen blonde and lacquered within an inch of its life, didn't budge against the Texas wind. The air smelled of cattle and cut hay, but her overwhelming cloud of bargain bin vanilla perfume threatened to drown it all out. This wasn't about a simple HOA violation. This was about 40 acres with valuable oil rights, and Karen thought she'd found someone she could steamroll. "Ma'am," I said evenly, "you do realize this is private property?" Her laugh could sour milk. "Not for long, sweetheart. What would you do if a stranger tried to erase your family's legacy?" Because that's exactly what she'd set in motion. She had no clue. She'd just declared war on a man who spent 15 years drafting the very federal rules that govern HOAs. Let me rewind. My name's Garrett Stone. 6 months ago, I was in Washington, D.C., a senior policy advisor at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. 6 figures, congressional hearings, endless coffee, and 15 years shaping HOA regulations across America. Then Grandpa Joe passed, leaving me the Lazy G Ranch outside Cedar Falls, Texas. Population, 8,400 on a good day. A place where gossip travels faster than the mail, and the diner's coffee could wake the dead. Grandpa bought this land right after Korea in 1952, 40 acres of prime ground, with mineral rights oil companies have circled like vultures for decades. I traded a cubicle for a wraparound porch, traded DC traffic for mornings of cattle lowing and meadowlark singing. Walking fence lines at dawn, my boots crunching the same gravel Grandpa walked for 70 years, breathing sage and mesquite instead of smog. That was real freedom. But my peace didn't last. Enter Karen Whitfield, age 52, real estate agent turned HOA despot. She'd left Dallas, bought an $850,000 McMansion in the shiny new subdivision next door, Whispering Oaks Estates. Within weeks, she was on the HOA board. Within a month, president. And within 2, she was strutting around in overpriced athleisure, clipboard in hand, acting like she ran the county. The first violation notice appeared on my door 3 months after I arrived. My cattle were an agricultural nuisance threatening property values. Never mind, my family had run livestock here long before Whispering Oaks was a subdivision instead of open prairie. I laughed it off, assuming she just didn't understand small-town Texas. I thought a polite chat over sweet tea would fix things. That was my mistake. The next week, she showed up with her cousin Dale from County Code Enforcement, snapping photos of everything. My manure pile, Grandpa's 1974 tractor, even the chickens who looked insulted. She kept hinting she was researching options to force compliance. That's when it clicked. This wasn't confusion. This was an attack. 2 days later, a thick manila envelope appeared taped to my door. Inside was the most official-looking cease and desist I'd ever seen outside a courthouse. Whitfield and Associates Legal Services, the header said. In reality, it was her kitchen table and a Costco printer. The paperwork was loaded with legal-sounding nonsense, health hazards, environmental risks, aesthetic violations. She even forged a survey map that somehow showed my ranch trespassing on HOA land. And then came the kicker, a mandatory compliance hearing at the Whispering Oaks Country Club. Not a request, a summons. Thursday night, 7 p.m., right when any rancher would be home at supper. Karen knew exactly how to be inconvenient. I went anyway. The conference room reeked of industrial air freshener masking old money dust. Karen had staged it like a kangaroo court, 12 HOA board members behind a mahogany table, and 1 folding chair for me. She wore a navy blazer worth more than my feed bill, ready with a PowerPoint called Agricultural Operations, Impact on Community Standards. My manure pile was a biological hazard. My chickens, disease vectors. Even Grandpa's old barn was labeled an eyesore. The coffee tasted like it had been brewed during the first Bush administration. "Mr. Stone," Karen began, her voice echoing. "You've been called here to answer for serious covenant violations." I looked around at the crowd, mostly city transplants who'd come seeking rural charm, only to want it sanitized. I leaned back in the rickety chair and asked, "Ma'am, can I see a copy of these community covenants you keep talking about?" The room went dead quiet. Karen's plastic smile flickered like a faulty neon sign. "Those documents require legal review before distribution." And right then, I knew. The fight was only beginning. She stammered, shuffling papers like she was searching for buried treasure. We can't just hand out proprietary information to outside parties. Outside parties, on land my family had owned since before most of these people even knew Texas was on a map. Time for my counterpunch. I pulled out my federal credentials and slid my card across the polished table like I was dealing poker. Well, Karen, I said evenly, I spent 15 years at HUD writing housing regulations. Maybe I can help clear up those legal complexities you're so worried about. You could have heard a pin drop. Half the board suddenly found their shoes fascinating, and Karen's face cycled through more colors than a busted traffic light. Here's what most folks don't know. HOAs are required by federal law, the Fair Housing Act, to provide governing documents to any property owner they claim authority over. Refusing to do so, that's evidence of discrimination. The turning point came when a timid woman with kind eyes raised her hand like she was back in school. Karen, she asked softly, didn't you tell us Mr. Stone was just some local rancher? Karen's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. Anyone can print business cards, Beverly, but the damage was done. These weren't bad people, just misled ones, and now they were wondering what else their fearless leader had neglected to mention. The meeting wrapped with Karen promising to provide documents after proper consultation. Translation, she needed time to figure out just how deep she'd buried herself. As folks shuffled out, that same nervous woman, Beverly Chin, caught me in the parking lot. Night sounds filled the air. Crickets, an owl in the distance, all of it more honest than anything that had gone on inside. Mr. Stone, she whispered, glancing around like she was plotting a jailbreak. Karen's been lying to us. About your ranch, the HOA's authority, even the money. Her voice trembled. I think she's planning something that could destroy the whole community. And just like that, I had my first ally in what was shaping up to be the HOA war of the century. Karen didn't slow down after that meeting. If anything, she doubled down. Within a week, she launched a campaign of bureaucratic warfare, death by 1,000 paper cuts. Monday brought Cousin Dale, clipboard in hand, citing unpermitted agricultural structures built decades before he was born. Tuesday, the State Environmental Commission showed up, chasing phantom groundwater contamination that mysteriously evaporated under testing. Wednesday, the Agriculture Department sent a vet to check my cattle for disease. Dr. Martinez, a no-nonsense professional, took one look at my glossy herd and asked if this was someone's idea of a joke. The strategy was clear: drown me in inspections, fees, and wasted time until selling became cheaper than fighting. I'd seen the tactic before. Developers weaponizing bureaucracy to push people off valuable land. Then Beverly came roaring up my driveway in her Honda Civic, dust flying. She sat trembling on my porch steps, Charlie the old ranch dog leaning against her for comfort. I haven't slept in 3 days, she admitted. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't tell someone the truth. What she laid on my kitchen table nearly floored me. Texts, emails, bank statements, a paper trail uglier than Karen's highlights. It wasn't about property values or community standards. It was about money. Sunset Holdings, the developer behind Whispering Oaks, had been feeding Karen inside info about my land. Her reward? A $50,000 finder's fee plus first pick of premium lots if she forced me out. But the real shocker was in the HOA paperwork Beverly smuggled out. One look, and I nearly spat out my coffee. The association had never been legally formed, no articles of incorporation, no recorded covenants, nothing. The HOA had no more legal authority than my chickens. Beverly, I said carefully, your HOA's been operating illegally this whole time. Karen's been running a con, and you all have been her cover. Her face went pale. You mean everything we've done has no legal standing? That's exactly what I mean. That revelation alone could have toppled Karen, but then Dr. Martinez called back. She dug deeper and found Karen had filed nearly identical livestock complaints in multiple counties, always tied to upcoming developments. Always fabricated. Karen wasn't just a neighborhood tyrant. She was running a multi-county scam, forcing rural families off their land for developer payouts. And now, thanks to Beverly, I had the evidence to prove it. That night, I sat in Grandpa's old recliner, coyote howls mixing with the low rumble of cattle bedding down. This wasn't just about saving my ranch anymore. It was about stopping Karen before she destroyed more families' legacies. So I picked up the phone and started calling old colleagues in Washington. If Karen wanted to play at the federal level, she was about to learn why you never pick a fight with a guy who helped write the rulebook. We had to freeze the HOA accounts before Karen could shuffle or torch more evidence, which meant fast injunctions and coordinating with banks. But the real fight wasn't just legal, it was narrative. Karen had kept her victims isolated, ashamed, convinced they were alone. Time to flip that script and show everyone the truth. I pulled out my old HUD training binder. Most people don't realize, I explained, when someone commits systematic housing fraud, it isn't just theft, it undermines property rights themselves. That's why federal agencies prosecute it under RICO. And RICO means the whole network goes down. Karen, her cousins, the developers paying her kickbacks. Plus, asset forfeiture means her victims might actually get their money back. Maria's pen never stopped moving. What about statute of limitations? She asked. Fraud has no expiration date if the scheme is still active. And it is. She's still targeting my ranch. By the end of the night, we had a battle plan tighter than any congressional briefing I'd ever sat through. Beverly would keep recording Karen's frantic attempts at control. Jim would rally the board to cut her out. Maria would draft emergency filings to freeze assets. My job was delicate, looping in the feds without spooking Karen. Premature disclosure always backfires. She had to keep digging her hole while we built the case. The beauty of experience was knowing exactly which agencies to wake up. HUD for housing violations, FBI for wire and mail fraud, IRS for undeclared payouts, State AG for RICO. And one more crucial step, contacting other victims. Their testimony would prove Karen's scheme wasn't local, but systemic. Beverly worried they'd be too scared. I assured her, witness protection, compensation funds, legal support. This time, nobody faced Karen alone. By Tuesday, injunctions froze her assets. Wednesday, Beverly unveiled proof of embezzlement. Maria lined up state prosecutors. And I started making calls to very specific people in Washington who lived for cases like this. Karen thought she found an easy mark. She'd actually picked the one guy who wrote the rules she was breaking. The pressure made her reckless. Monday, she hired a private I named Rick to dig up dirt on me. He came back with a spotless record and commendations. Tuesday, she spread bribe rumors about my grandfather. Commissioner Williams laughed her off the phone. By Wednesday night, she was caught on my cameras spray painting my fence with health hazard graffiti, whispering about insurance scams while the audio rolled. Thursday, she filed false police reports with laughable fake transcripts. Sheriff Morrison compared them with my phone logs and just shook his head. Meanwhile, Beverly recorded the HOA meeting where Karen's own board turned on her. Cornered about $127,000 in missing funds, she cycled through denial, blame, and paranoia before Maria asked for proof the HOA even existed. Jim hit play on my recording about their lack of incorporation. Beverly told me later, "You should have seen her face when she realized everyone knew it was all fake." By Friday, the HOA voted to dissolve itself and forward criminal referrals. Karen's response was to fire off threatening emails, witness intimidation on record. Her spiral accelerated. Rick came back, this time wanting immunity in exchange for proof she'd offered him $10,000 to plant evidence on my ranch. Another federal crime logged. Friday night, I sat on my porch listening to cattle settle, feeling the calm before the storm. Karen had thrown everything at me. Legal nonsense, media spin, vandalism, false reports, and every swing just gave prosecutors more ammo. Then came her final act. Monday morning, 2 fake federal agents showed up in windbreakers and cheap suits, waving forged documents about an emergency health order. They ordered me to relocate all livestock within 24 hours. Problem was, I'd spent 15 years writing the regulations they were pretending to enforce. Their paperwork was impressive forgery, but their performance was laughable. "Gentlemen," I asked calmly while my cameras recorded, "under what statute does the EPA have authority to close private ranches?" They fumbled, invented a law that didn't exist, and started sweating when I reached for my phone. Real federal agents were already hidden on my property, documenting everything. Within seconds, the actors bolted to their rental car, gravel flying. Karen wasn't embarrassed, she was proud. She posted on Facebook about her federal intervention, claiming victory and leadership. She even paraded the footage at an HOA meeting, bragging about imaginary high-level contacts. Beverly brought me recordings of her inventing entire conversations with senators. Every word was another nail in her coffin. That evening, Karen escalated again, showing up at my ranch with Dale and two men trying to force federal compliance by opening cattle gates and releasing my herd onto public roads. My security system caught it all, Karen directing accomplices, her voice clear as day. At that point, it wasn't just harassment anymore. It was attempted livestock theft under the guise of federal authority. And with every desperate move, she handed us the ironclad case we'd been building. Monday had started with a fake raid. It was going to end with real federal charges. Sheriff Morrison rolled up with 2 units in tow, the kind of timing that doesn't happen by accident. Word was someone tipped him off, and the sight of cruisers sent Karen's hired hands scattering like roaches under a kitchen light. She stood alone at my cattle gate, frozen in headlights, realizing for the first time she wasn't the hunter anymore. Morrison stepped out with the tired grin of a man, finally closing a file that had been on his desk too long. "Karen Whitfield," he said, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, livestock theft, impersonating federal agents, and about 6 other felonies we're still tallying." The cuffs clicked shut, sweeter than a church bell on Sunday. Months of her filing bogus complaints to see me in cuffs, and now she was the one riding downtown in the back seat. She shrieked about federal authority, black helicopters, government plots, still clinging to her fantasy as it crumbled around her. That night I sat on my porch, cattle settled, coyotes calling across the ridge, the air finally clean of the poison Karen had pumped into it. She played every card. Fake HOAs, forged documents, vandalism, fake agents, but each move just built a bigger case. Tomorrow would be her curtain call. And she didn't even know it yet. By Tuesday evening, she'd somehow convinced herself she was still the star. Out on bond, she called a town hall to celebrate federal success over my ranch. The community center was packed. Neighbors, reporters, and more federal agents than she realized. She strutted in wearing a Navy suit worth more than some mortgages, firing up another PowerPoint about her advocacy. First slide, a photo of my ranch under the words Federal Intervention Success Story. The irony was thick enough to choke on. Then Beverly Chin stood up. "Karen, why were you arrested yesterday for fraud and conspiracy?" The room dropped 20 degrees. Karen's smile cracked, but she pressed on, babbling about bureaucratic misunderstandings. Beverly wasn't done. "And what about the $127,000 missing from community funds?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen stammered something about operational expenses. That's when I rose in the back. Her eyes went wide. I walked forward as the room split down the middle. "Karen, want to explain your finder's fee arrangement with Sunset Holdings?" She sputtered denial. Beverly swapped her slides for the real ones. Bank records, text messages, surveillance stills, recordings. The evidence rolled across the screen like a funeral march. Gasps turned to outrage. Years of trust snapped in seconds. "Ladies and gentlemen," I told them, "Karen Whitfield isn't your HOA president. She's a con artist who's been running land fraud across Texas, cashing in while destroying families like mine." The crowd surged with anger. That's when Agent Martinez stood up, badge out. "Karen Whitfield, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, and civil rights violations under color of law." Cameras flashed as she was cuffed again, this time in front of everyone she'd fooled. Neighbors who once nodded along to her speeches now turned their backs as she was marched past them, shrieking about conspiracies. Martinez paused long enough to set the record straight. My ranch was spotless. Karen had been the target all along. The applause didn't start until Pete Jameson, who'd known my family 3 generations, called out, "Garrett, we owe you an apology." And then Beverly stepped up, voice clear, declaring I hadn't just defended my ranch, but saved the community. Folks left that night angry, yes, but united, finally free of Karen's spell. The smell of sage rolled in through the open doors as neighbors talked about rebuilding, about doing it right this time. 6 months later, the view from my porch is nothing but gold sunrise over land no developer will ever touch. Karen Whitfield is serving 15 to 20 after pleading guilty to a criminal resume that reads like a textbook. Wire fraud, impersonation, conspiracy, RICO. Sunset Holdings collapsed under federal indictments, their Texas empire in ashes. Victims got restitution. My neighbors built a legitimate HOA under Beverly's leadership. Property values rose. The ranch thrived. And I used settlement money to start a foundation, helping rural families fight the same kind of scams. We've already saved dozens. Karen's fall sparked reforms across the state. The Rural Family Protection Act now punishes land fraud schemes harder than ever. What she meant for destruction became a catalyst for protection. Meanwhile, my grandfather's land is alive and untouchable. The cattle are strong, the air smells of sage and rain, and the morning coffee tastes like victory. Karen thought she was targeting an easy mark. Instead, she picked the wrong fight with the wrong rancher and found out the hard way what happens when you try to steal from a man who knows the system better than you do.